Hey everyone, it's Raghu, and I'm back with Danny Goleman. And Danny is you've heard from Danny before. We've done podcasts over the years. And of course, Danny is part of that group that ended up in India with Neem Karoli Baba through basically, well, we did through Ram Dass. In fact, Danny and Ramesh Wardas and Krishna Das got through via a letter that they wrote to KK Shah. And that's a whole story, which, by the way, Danny, first of all, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Go on here.
Should I tell that story? It's an interesting story.
Yeah, tell it from your point of view. The reason I said that is because we just finished a documentary just the other day about KK, and in it, Krishnadas gave his version of that story. So you give it.
Well, I've only heard it from KD, Krishnadas, but basically he wrote the letter to KK asking if the three of us could come to see Neem Karoli Baba. And he went to Neem Karoli and said, they want to come. What should I tell them? And Neem Karoli said, tell them not to come. Yeah. So KK was very clever. Chalak is the word. Cunning. And he said, Neem Karoli, she said something like this. Neem Karoli never asked people to come, but if you should be near the town of Nainital, he never turns people away. And so, now this was what we needed. We needed to know where in all of India we should go to find him. And Nainital was the answer. And of course, we tracked KK down, who lived in Nainital, and he brought us to Kenchi. Yeah. And then that began a kind of onslaught of Westerners. Yeah. I don't know how the word of mouth spread. How did you hear, Raghu?
Same as you, Ram Dass. And I didn't write a letter or anything. I just said, he said, I'm going to India. This was in 70 when you guys went in the early fall, I believe, fall of 1970. Right. And he said, he'll be there. And he said, just get in touch with me and we'll see. So I said, okay. And I was writing him at, American Express in Delhi. And finally met up with him. And he said, I know, first he said, I don't know where Maharaji is. Because after you guys saw him, he kind of disappeared there for a while. That's right. And then Ram Dass said, well, he's up in the mountains now. And he gave me a note to the teacher. In this case, it was ML, KK's cousin and best friend. And off we went. So that, listen, you were there when Maharaji said in Kenchi, remember when Ram Dass threw a plate of food at Tukaram after he walked from
Apparently, yes.
So in that moment, Maharaji said, look, he said the most serious thing I think I ever heard him say, like rational kind of a thing, and it was, none of you would have gotten here except for Ram Dass.
Oh, I don't remember that part. What I remember is he said, maybe this was with the guy who let the potatoes.
Yeah, no, that's a different one. Yeah.
That's a different one. Never been out of your heart. Anyway, he said a lot of great things.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
During that time.
So this movie, it's called The Bridge of Grace. Since we're talking about it, I can do a little promo. The Gift of KK Shah, and it'll be available, everybody. We're going to premiere it at New York, where a bunch of us are going to do what Danny and I just have been doing, telling stories about our experience there. And we will debut the film, and Krishnadas will do a big kirtan, and we will tell stories. So and Nina's going to do some stuff as well. So that's this Saturday, June 7th. And you just go to ramdas.org and you'll be able to see the pop-up if you want to come.
3?
It starts at 1:30.
Oh.
Yeah.
Where's the panel?
The panel is at 1:30.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, good. I'm glad that we got that straight. Anyhow, the other somewhat amusing thing is, and we're here to talk about something really serious, emotional intelligence, which is so substantially needed in where we are in the midst of this what's going on in our world. But just in terms of levity, so Danny and his wife at the time, Anasuya, and Mirabai Bush and her husband Krishna and myself and Parvati, we happened to leave India around the same time for visa reasons mostly, I think. And somehow we ended up in Quebec, where my father had a horse farm, the six of us, okay? And even weirder, because he had come to India, my father, just 7 months before, and Maharaji had him take acid to get him a little bit straightened out. So that's a whole other story.
Is that right? Oh, interesting.
But he went back to India, which just think of it nowadays, okay, you can fly back and forth, not that big a deal, still a big deal. But back then, it was a real big deal, And so he went back, and when he went back, we took over his farm. We moved everything out that you could sit on because we wanted to stay in India. How best to do that? Keep sitting on the floor. Anyhow, we had an incredible summer there. And, of course, one of Danny's sons was born there, his oldest son, Govindas.
And all of his 4 kids now have Canadian passports.
Oh.
That was
really?
A boon. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a boon. The same thing is happening with my, because my son, same Sham, who was born there as well as Mirabai's son, Owen.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody's getting Canadian passports. God help us. Anyhow, that was a moment that I was just recalling before I got the Zoom going with you, Just an amazing moment. And Danny then was doing a lot of writing for New York Times, science editor. And then one day, somehow, he bumped into this phrase, right? This was not a well-known aphoristic thing, right? At the time, I think you said you got it. Where did you get emotional intelligence from?
So my job at the Times as a science journalist was to look at academic journals for something that would be of interest to a wider audience, the Times audience, and to write about it in a way where they would, want to read it. And so I stumbled upon an article called Emotional Intelligence. It was written by a guy named Peter Salovey, a junior psychologist at Yale, and his graduate student, Jack Mayer. Peter became the president of Yale University eventually. He was a very good psychologist, but I thought, wow, when I saw that phrase, emotional intelligence, that is gold. That's like an oxymoron, You never see emotions together with intelligence, but it really was being intelligent about emotions. And I used that as the title of the book, which became a bestseller all over the world, actually.
Yeah.
The book I had been writing was about emotions in the brain, but then I got more deeply into emotional intelligence, and as a psychologist myself, I was able to develop my own model of emotional intelligence, which I've been working on ever since.
Why don't you just give a basic premise for what that emotional intelligence
What's
is?
Emotional intelligence? The way I look at it, there's 4 parts. There's self-awareness, emotional self-awareness, knowing what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, when you're feeling it. You could call it mindfulness of emotions. Then there's using that information, this is the second part, to manage your emotions, to stay focused and ignore. Distractions are always emotional, something that you're avoiding or that turns you on or that fascinates you. That's why our phones are so dangerous. Are distractions. But one of the elements of self-management is being able to stay focused on what matters to you right now, the work at hand. Second part is working toward a goal, a long-term goal. That's another part of self-management. Staying optimistic, being adaptable no matter what happens. The third part of emotional intelligence is what you could call social awareness. I think of it really as empathy. And there are three kinds of empathy. One is cognitive empathy, knowing how someone else thinks about things. AI is genius at this because it's a language learning model. That's what it does. But then there's emotional empathy. AI has no emotion. It might have a little deficit here. It can mimic emotionality, but it doesn't really feel it. The third aspect, I think, is the most important. That's empathic concern. You not only know how someone thinks and feels, you care about them. And I think that if we're smart, we'll be sure AI is programmed to care about people, because it might not. The fourth part is using empathy to have effective relationships. In the workplace, that means if you're a leader, being able to inspire people with a shared mission or influence and guide them. Being able to resolve conflicts is another part of it. But also being a good team member. Being able to get along and cooperate with other people, that's very, very important. So those are basically the aspects of emotional intelligence.
And you mentioned AI, of course, and what's going on there. How do you think that emotional intelligence, how are we going to relate with AI, with emotional intelligence? Interestingly enough, I think you know Danielle Kredic, who had the Google Empathy Lab. I believe you know who she is.
Don't know.
No? Anyhow, she's actually on our board now, and that lab was disbanded, after during the pandemic or after the pandemic or whatever. And but the reason that I met her is that one of the things that she was tasked to do was inform the developers around AI and just give them some practical guidelines about doing what you suggested, which is, there is no emotional thing in there, and easily this can go off the rails in that manner.
That's right.
The first person she thought of was Ram Dass.
Oh, really?
So she chased me around a retreat that we were doing in Maui at one point, really purposefully.
Sure.
And we did end up doing something with Google Empathy Lab, actually. And she made a very small film that was really terrific around Ram Dass's purview, around science and spirituality, basically. And but that was a major thing that she was involved with, and God only knows what's going on today.
It's really interesting. The one time I I gave a talk on emotional intelligence at Google early on, and it was packed. They had to use 2 overflow rooms, and then they started a thing with their integrating mindfulness with emotional intelligence. They called it Search Inside Yourself.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That's a big thing now. I think independent of Google. But they also, one point, asked if I would help them help engineers there be more influential. And what that means is, you might have a great idea, a brilliant idea, but if nobody cares about you or your idea, no one listens, it doesn't matter, it doesn't go anywhere. How do you form alliances? How do you influence people? That's all part of emotional intelligence. By the way, I should mention that the key strengths of emotional intelligence are now available from Keystep Media online for people to go through it at their own pace if they want.
Yes, and we'll have that up in the show notes too, so people can link up there. And you'll give that to me.
I will.
Yeah.
So the good news about emotional intelligence, unlike IQ, is that you can learn it. It's learnable at any point in life. You can always improve. Your IQ pretty much stays the same throughout life. Emotional intelligence can get better and better if you care, if you want.
Yeah. There's an interesting. I went back through the book. I hadn't seen it in many, many years, and emotional intelligence and destiny. I don't remember reading that chapter, but can you talk about that? That's interesting.
What are you thinking of, Raghu?
Well, I'm thinking of destiny. That leads me to think about karma, samskaras, all of that. From the spiritual.
Right. Well, there are different views. One of the scientific views of all of that is that there actually is no free will. That we're pre-programmed, and you could call it karma, you could call it from a past life, whatever, but that that says that the choices we make in life are inevitable because of who we are and what we bring to that moment of choice. So one of the choices might be, I'm going to improve my self-awareness. I'm going to get better at empathy. I want to improve my relationships or my ability to manage my own feelings. And once you've made that choice, the good news is you can follow through and you can get better if you have someone guiding you through it, which is, I've tried to provide that online through programs like the one I just described. But I don't know where you were going with destiny and emotional intelligence. Tell me some more.
No, I was wondering where you were going with it.
That's where I went. Yeah.
But, interestingly enough, it just triggered a story, actually. And I don't remember if you were there. I think you were. We were in Allahabad, and where Maharaj used to go for winter. For the winter and stay with him. And we all went down there one winter. I guess it was 72. And this is a famous story where Ram Dass went to Maharaji, Neem Karoli Baba, and said, "Are karma and grace the same?" So Maharaji said, Ram Dass, I can't talk about this in public. Okay. So he came back, Ram Dass came back, and he was telling us this. And he just thought, it can't be different. It can't be. And then suddenly, Dada, who was Maharaji's right-hand man, if you want to call it that, came to Ram Dass and said, Maharaji told me to tell you, Ram Dass, you and I understand each other very well. So, that was the thought, that they aren't separate. Many years later, I was just sitting with Siddhima, many years after Maharaji left. And I asked her this question, are karma and grace the same? And she said, yeah. But you can't act that way. You have to act because you don't know that. You'd have to be in. She didn't say it quite this way. She just said you don't know that, and so you have to act as if they are not. In other words, you've got to do things like you just said. You can have an intention to become more empathetic, kinder, caring. You can have these intentions, and you have a way to carry them through. And that was the result of that. I told Ram Dass when I came back, and he just said, yeah, I knew that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy.
So I would say that my ideas about emotional intelligence were no doubt informed by my experiences in India. But I can't quite say how. I think, osmotically, when you think about self-awareness, every spiritual tradition has used some way of getting people to look at themselves, know thyself, classically.
Yeah.
And every spiritual tradition has talked about managing your inner life one way or another. I think empathy is the prerequisite for compassion.
Yeah.
The same. But You have to have empathy to have real compassion. Tibetan Lama recently said AI will never have real compassion because it can't feel pain. There's no grief. It's basically a set of code. And I think that being able to have real relationships, real intimacy, for example, it will be beyond AI because it takes responding to emotional nuance in a way that it can't because it doesn't have those feelings. It can mimic it. That's the thing. I think we can get sucked in or fooled by AI. I had a friend ask AI, do you have a self? And
No.
AI responded cleverly. It said, oh, I have to think about that. I'll get back to you. It never got back to him.
Oh
Yeah.
my, that's
So you
fun.
can stump AI by asking the right questions.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Something so useful and utilitarian,
Well,
and then
it is.
on the opposite is as true.
Here's the question. People say that as AI becomes more and more dominant in the workplace, the elements of emotional intelligence will become more valuable. As leaders will need it. People on teams will need it to work effectively together. People who handle other people need it in order to handle people well. If you're in medicine or nursing or teaching, I think all of this, the subtleties of emotional intelligence will matter more and more.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. There's one funny thing, because I've been working so much with this film and dissecting everything with KK and what he said. He, being a very unusual person at the very least. So he told the story. So he got what he considered and what was, as we all experience it, the boon of forever being a child. Remember that? So
that explains a lot.
And at one point, he told the story how it happened, and it was really not grokking the social consequences of a situation that Maharaji put him in about feeding people. He ended up not being able to feed everybody because he didn't allocate.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which, and so Maharaji at one point, after it was all over, said to him, KK, you'll be forever a child because you don't understand how to deal with social circumstance, something like that, which I read, you were talking about it in the book, where people don't, they don't attend to, and they cannot. And I'm assuming that, one of the big things is that, what did you call it? Just reorganizing feelings, and this is about children and being able to understand that.
Yeah.
So that's important. And yet, KK, he obviously his perspective was he even says in the film, in that moment I was not very mature. He says, and then he says, and to this day, right now, I'm still not.
Well, I mean, there are a couple of senses in which you can be mature or not mature. One is what's called cognitive control. This means you have an impulse to act, which is always an emotion. Emote means to move, and you pause before you act, or you have the ability to think twice. And maybe KK didn't. The other sense is that you don't pick up social cues, which is
That's
another
what he
way
was talking about. Yeah.
And if you're going to operate effectively, even elegantly, in a social situation, whether it's at work or a party or whatever. You need to be able to pick up social cues and respond. If you don't, people feel you're off somehow. KK was in a privileged position because everybody knew that he was like super close to Neem Karoli Baba. And so
he's with him since he's 7, by the way, everybody.
Since
7 years old.
Exactly. But most of us don't have that luxury. We have to make our way in the world, which is why it's important. Cognitive control, there's a wonderful test for that for a 4-year-old. And they did this at Stanford. You bring a kid who's 4 into a room, sit him down at a little table, put a marshmallow in front of him and say, you can have this now if you want, but if you don't eat it till I run an errand and I come back, you can have 2. And then you leave. And, about a third of kids grab it. They can't stand it. They gobble it down on the spot. About a third wait the end of 7 or 8 minutes. They get the 2 marshmallows. But the payoff actually was 14 years later, the kids are tracked down. And they found that the kids who waited versus the kids who grabbed they got along better with their friends and peers. They did better in school. When they tracked them down in their 30s, they were making more money than the other group, the impulsive. So if you have this ability at midlife, you live longer, it turns out.
Really?
So it's really important. It's a part of emotional intelligence. And I think KK had the luxury of not needing it. He had other things going for him. Yeah. Most of us need this kind of ability to handle our emotions, handle our impulses.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, the social cues that KK ignored, we need them. And empathy means you can read the room, you can read the crowd, you can read people.
Yeah, just everybody. By the way, KK did everything possible. I mean, Danny told that story. Without KK, who knows what might have happened in terms of them getting to India and meeting Neem Karoli Baba. And
maybe nothing. Yeah.
Maybe nothing. You never know.
I mean, who knows if we would have ended up there. KK was instrumental.
Yeah. So he's not without empathy, everybody. And social cues, I don't know about. But in the end, this we're talking about this film. It's my whole life right now in a moment. But in the film, the very end of the film, I happened to record him on Skype. He called me in the middle of the night, India time. And he said, I just was with Neem Karoli Baba, Maharaji. And he made all these demands, it just encapsulated his particular relationship with the divine. It was extraordinary, actually. And at the end, he said, okay, so, I love these Westerners. And Maharaji said, I love them. They're very pure. And then KK said, well, if that's true, don't do anything for me. If you're thinking about doing something for me, do it for them.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And that's how it ends.
Beautiful. KK was really a wonderful remote. He was a bodhisattva, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, just an amazing being. So speaking to that, and I have been working with different people, doing podcasts and so on. And by the way, this last course that we put on the foundation was called Intimacy with All Things. It's from the Dogen quote, "Enlightenment is intimacy with all things." And certainly compassion is front and center, in relation to what are we talking about. And you have a beautiful chapter, beautiful meaning. It's very revealing for people, I think, and it's called Empathy and Ethics, the Roots of Altruism. And I know His Holiness the Dalai Lama speaks to altruism a lot. He's secular ethics and so on. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so when the Dalai Lama turned 80, he's about to be 90 in July.
90.
Of 2025.
Yeah.
When he turned 80, I wrote a book with him called The Force for Good. It was about the Dalai Lama, his outlook, his mindset, and the things he does. And he's basically the world champion of compassion, I think.
Yes.
He does so many things. He, for example, takes no money for anything he does. If money comes, he puts it into a foundation, and he never mentions this, but he's supporting hospitals in India and communities of people who, in India, this is really tough, but who might be a leper or have some disability. There's no social net in India. People like that fall unless they are lucky enough to end up in a community, and he supports these kinds of communities. So he has always done under the radar all kinds of compassionate things, and he has always encouraged that. And altruism is a way of life for him. He lives very simply. He travels with an entourage, but that's because he's the Dalai Lama and he needs protection.
Yeah.
But he himself lives like a monk. He is a monk, he said. You ask him, who are you? He says, I'm a simple monk. And he takes no money for himself. A lot of money comes toward him, and he gives it all away. Like, I think Neem Karoli was probably the same. He wouldn't take any money from Western, at least from the people I knew. And the Dalai Lama has gone around the world when he traveled. I don't know that he does much anymore, but he would always be talking about compassion. And Raghu, I don't know if you ever met Kunu Lama in Bodh Gaya. I know you're in Bodh Gaya.
Yes, no, I did not, actually. At least I don't remember. I did.
Yeah. Kunu Lama was a very simple old Lama who lived in the Tibetan monastery in Bodh Gaya. I went to see him with KD and with Chaitanya different times, with Tara. And Kunu Lama had been off. He was revered by everybody, it turned out. And when he came to Bodh Gaya, they offered him the equivalent of the presidential suites where the Dalai Lama stayed, the penthouse on the monastery. And he said, no, I just want a monk's room. And when I visited him, he had a wooden tucket like Maharaja used to have in a simple room, like, 10 by 8 or something, nothing else. And he lived so simply. Then I found out years later, he was the Dalai Lama's teacher on compassion.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah. And the Dalai Lama always recognized him whenever he taught about compassion. So he was a model of living simply, but being totally generous at the same time.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm interested in terms of sharing that through podcasts and whatever. And because when people speak to their issues around the difficulties just day to day, it always comes back on thinking about me.
It's true, yeah.
It always comes back there. Krishnadas has this great thing that he does in the midst of his kirtans and all that, and he talks about the movie of me. You wake up in the morning. You're the director, the writer, the producer, you even write your own reviews. And he goes on from there. I turned that I kind of stole it from him, the movie of me to the movie of we, which I did with a podcast partner, Duncan Trussell. And I was looking, what would be the advisal, at the end of this audio book in relation to how to step out of that complete fixation on that small self that we all have. And I came across something of Ram Dass, which made sense because I was spending a lot of my time around Ram Dass. And he just told a beautiful story. And it was all about two things, generosity and compassion. Or compassion and generosity.
Right. Well, the Dalai Lama has always said that the more selfless you can be, the more compassionate you can be. The less you think about yourself, the more open you are to the needs of others, is what it comes down to. And selflessness that is not focusing on the movie of me is a maxim, I think, of every major spiritual tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the other hand, I must say our culture really fans the movie of me. It,
You think so?
economics depends on it,
Yeah.
and you want the latest this or the latest that for me. And in fact, people want you to buy that because that keeps the machine going. So there's a lot in the culture which reinforces the attitude of, I need to get that for me.
But it's also something that's even to me more pernicious in relation to becoming whole beings. And that is the way that, the judging that we do, the internal judging and the external judging.
Those are the reviews.
Yeah, those are the reviews.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's one thing about, trying to grab what we can out there. And there's another thing where we're making everybody other.
I need to mention my wife's book, Emotional Alchemy, because it deals with exactly
Tara, by the way, Tara Goleman.
Goleman, Emotional Alchemy, because she talks about how to bring mindfulness, that is, how to identify thoughts like that. You're working with changing your very being or your patterns, your emotional patterns. I think it's really, really important that we be able to have an inner awareness that lets us see when we're judging, when we're wanting, when we're averse, whatever it may be. Because those are the key internal outlooks that keep us going on this perpetual wheel of motion that is our lives.
Yeah. You mentioned, which I remember that was in the book, but it's the Terry Dobson story on the subway. It's a case report, as you say, for emotional brilliance. That's probably something. Do you want to tell that little story? Whoop, Danny, you did something. You muted yourself. There you go. That's good.
So Terry was an interesting guy. He was a Marine, and we got out of the Marines. He was in Japan, and he became one of the first American students of Aikido. And his teacher said, you must never use these methods outside the dojo except in self-defense or to help someone else. So one day, Terry was on a really crowded subway in Tokyo, as only Tokyo subways can be that crowded. And at one stop, big drunk guy got in, and he said, get out of my way to everybody. And he started knocking people around and making a path for himself. And Terry thought, aha, this is my moment. So he stands up, and the guy says, oh, foreigner, I'm going to show you a thing or two. And he starts staggering toward Terry, and Terry's getting in position to take him out in a move. And all of a sudden, an old Japanese man who's sitting to the side in a traditional kimono pipes up to the guy. Hey, how are you? He says. And the drunk looks at him like he's startled. And the old man says, hey, come here, sit next to me. I want to talk to you. So he slumps down. The guy came over there, the drunk guy. And the old guy starts telling him about how he and his wife end every day sitting under the persimmon tree and talking about the day to each other. And then this old man says to the drunk, do you do anything like that? And the drunk says, no, I don't got no wife. I don't got no job. I really down and out. And the old man says, well, you can come home with me. And then Terry realized, okay.
It's so great. Ram Dass has quoted it as well many times.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I see that as real emotional intelligence, because he connected with that guy, the old man, connected with the drunk, not in a violent way, the way Terry was prepared to do, but in a much more intimate way, person to person. And that made the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one partway through this book, you talk about managing with heart. So and there's a lot in there around teamwork and so on and so forth, which I think before we got on, I told you, I've been encountering this in so many different ways. We have a large staff, for a small foundation and all that. And emotional intelligence has come up more than once, should I say. A little advice.
Here's the thing that startled me. When I wrote the book, Emotional Intelligence, which was like 25 or more years ago, I had this little thin chapter about the workplace, but I got huge response from businesses and organizations. And I ended up really focusing on that. And I've done several books since then, really about emotional intelligence in the workplace. And basically, it's that the brain does not distinguish between the rest of your life and your work life. Emotions come with you everywhere you go. And when I first wrote the book, people were saying things like, you can't use the word emotions in the workplace, in a business. People, will dismiss it. But now it's become kind of standard, particularly for leaders, particularly for team members, particularly for people in positions like nursing or sales, where it's person to person and makes such a difference. Because how you fill that position, how you handle people as a leader, do you listen? Are you empathic? Do you care? Do you guide? Can you articulate a shared mission that inspires people? Makes such a difference. And it turns out that the most high-performing teams have emotional intelligence at the group level. So their self-awareness means they can name openly the strengths and limits of every person on the team. And they know who should do what. And this builds a huge sense of trust, or takes a huge sense of trust to do that. But it means people on the team trust each other. Empathy means not only knowing your team members, but also knowing who in your larger group or larger organization or in another organization you depend on. It may be people in your supply chain in a business, or it may be clients if you're a professional or a consultant. And you need to understand them and what their needs are and be able to respond to that. That's empathy at the group level. And so the top teams, this is the research of Vanessa Druskat, University of New Hampshire. She's just bringing out a book this summer with Harvard Business School Press. Raghu, maybe put that in the show notes too.
Yeah.
About high-performing teams and how emotional intelligence makes all the difference at the team level. So I would say that in leadership, in team membership, and in any position where you're dealing with other people, emotional intelligence matters. It makes a huge difference.
I want to read something, actually, Danny. It's so pertinent, and it's your own trials and tribulations you went through around health stuff, that this was many, many years ago. And you say, in the land of the sick, emotions reign supreme. Fear is a thought away. We can be so emotionally fragile while we are ailing because our mental well-being is based in part on the illusion of invulnerability. Sickness, especially severe illness, bursts that illusion, attacking the premise that our private world is safe and secure. Suddenly we feel weak, helpless, and vulnerable. So, and you say the problem is when medical personnel ignore how patients are reacting emotionally. I think that's
Right.
the
Yeah.
key here, even while attending to the physical condition. Yeah.
Well, I think that too many people who work in the healthcare ignore the emotional dimension, but the physicians and the nurses and the caretakers we love speak to the emotional reality too, and I think both matters. Some people make the case that your emotional state influences your physical state, your health. And there's a good case to be made for that. But I'd say even if it doesn't, your emotional condition matters for you and for how you relate to whatever is going on. I mean, I've been with some people who I'm thinking of the nursing home that my mother-in-law is in. There's one woman who's almost 100 who has the most positive outlook. She's got a sunny disposition. She can't walk and she's got this and that wrong with her. And she's just a delight to be with.
Wow.
And it's because of her emotional state. And then there are other people I know who are not in a nursing home, but who are always complaining. Even though they're actually in good health. And that's part of the emotional condition. So I think that your emotional state determines how you feel about whatever's going on, whether it's a health condition or not. And that when we have something seriously wrong, as I said, it just undermines our sense that we're okay. And it's easy to give way to catastrophizing, to thinking about the worst that can happen and dwelling on that. So your outlook matters. Remember when Ram Dass, who had this horrible stroke, you visited him in Maui many times, he had the best outlook, didn't he?
Yeah. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, never mind that. I used to, when I wasn't there and I was here, I was constantly in touch because of all the work and all that. And I would say, "How are you doing?" And he'd go, "Oh, fine. Everything is just fine." And I'd say, "Ram Dass, I don't believe you. I talked to your caretakers. I know a little bit." He said, "Oh, right." And then he went into this litany of medical conditions that
he suffered from.
Yeah, that would put someone in, into a crying state. And then I said, finally, I just said, "Okay, wait a minute. I can't handle more than what you're doing. I can't handle it." I mean, it was incredible that he could live with the pain, talk about being able to be with suffering.
He had such equanimity. I remember one of the most profound conversations I had with him, visiting him in Maui, was when he was having terrible pain from a urinary tract infection. And he was still right there. It was really phenomenal. And I think it's because he had a lot of stability in that state, enormous stability. And he probably would have said it was grace, but I also think he had a lot to do with it too.
Yeah. I mean, what he went through in his life, it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, being in that wheelchair for 22 years or whatever, it was something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, people said, his life expectancy was maybe 1/3 of that, from the kind of stroke he had. Yeah, no, he's a wonderful example.
I remember spending time with him and never even noticing that he was wheelchair bound. He couldn't really move anything but one arm and his face. He was paralyzed, and you never thought about it with him because I don't think he thought about it.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Right there.
That's remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something to strive for, I think.
Yeah. But I mean, for everybody and everybody who's listening, and I told Danny earlier, I wanted to do this because we all, right now, we are, talk about jumping into a cauldron easily of projections and suffering and othering and everything. And by the way, we have a new book. This is like a whole hour of sponsorship, but Ram Dass' first posthumous book. I don't know if you know this. I can't remember. If you talk to Mirabai, because she came up with the title, There Is No Other.
That's beautiful. Quite beautiful.
Now, when I mention that to people, and they react, many people react, well, I don't know about that. You hear this, you see the news today, and on and on and on. They go on and on and on. And they miss the whole boat. Listen, myself, I can tell when I'm missing the boat, by objectifying and whatever else we do.
The Tibetans talk about two truths, relative truth and ultimate truth. Mm-hmm. And there is no other as ultimate truth, but the news is full of relative truth. And a lot of us get sucked into whatever crisis or horrible thing we hear about in the news cycle. That's conventional reality, but the ultimate truth transcends that.
Yeah.
And I think Ram Dass was a beautiful example of that. Neem Karoli definitely lived there.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah. Well, Ram Dass's thing was, we can live on more than one plane of consciousness at the same time as humans.
Yeah.
And that is certainly what he accomplished, for sure.
The first time I ever heard Ram Dass talk, I was a graduate.
Where was that? Do you remember when?
I remember because I arranged the talk.
Oh.
He had just come back from India, and I met him just by happenstance, and I invited him back to Harvard because I was a member of the graduate student colloquium committee. I could do that. And it turned out it was the first time he'd ever returned there since he was fired as Richard Alpin.
Yeah.
And one of the things he said in his talk was this idea that there are different channels that we could tune into on consciousness. Mm. And there was a relative one, the one everybody's listening to. And then there were others that only a few people listened to. Mm-hmm. And I was very interested in that. I think that may be why I went to India, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to meet someone, it turned out to be Neem Karoli Baba, who only listened to the other channels.
Yeah.
Or mainly
That's a good, That's a great analogy. Oh, boy. Yeah, we were fortunate, though, for sure. And, you've had this wonderful relationship with the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, as well as, another book we absolutely have to put in the show notes that I love, that we did a podcast on, how to meditate.
Oh, yeah.
With Tsoknyi Rinpoche.
Exactly. Yeah, I've been fortunate. I made it my business after meeting Maharaji and Neem Karoli to ferret out other people who might be, somewhere on the spectrum, so to speak.
Yeah.
And Tsoknyi Rinpoche is definitely one of them. He's been a teacher. He's a Tibetan Lama. And the book we wrote together is How to Meditate, which is really his view of spiritual development and progression. And I contributed some scientific findings that seemed to underscore what he was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to put that in the show notes.
Yeah, he's fantastic. In fact, I'll have to talk to you offline about how do we get to do a podcast with Rinpoche.
He's in great demand worldwide.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah,
I hardly get to see him, so I don't know.
Well, we're going to try. Anyhow, I really thank you, Danny, for being here and being on the podcast. And
always happy to talk to you, Raghu.
Yeah, and everybody. I mean, this podcast will probably come out on Friday, the day before June 7th. But I think there'll still be tickets available to go to see Krishna Das, and he'll do his wonderful kirtan, and then the KK movie, and then Danny and I and several other people, including Krishna Das, will share the way we've been sharing, actually just doing exactly what we just did, sharing.
Just hanging out.
Just hanging out, yeah. So please do join us. You can go to ramdas.org and see a pop-up there, and you can get connected. And so everybody, again, go to BeHereNowNetwork.com facebook.com/mindrolling. And all of what we have been discussing and links to it all will be available in the show notes there. And again, thanks, Danny. Really appreciate it.
I want to thank you. It's always a pleasure, Raghu.